Let's open our Bibles tonight to 1 Samuel chapter 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18. Begin reading with verse 1. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Johnathan was knit with the soul of David, and Johnathan loved him as his own son. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Johnathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Johnathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. Father, we come tonight. Lord, I pray that you would help us to focus on one thing and one thing only. May we put aside the activities of last week. May we put aside the anticipations of this week. May we put aside everything. May our minds be completely empty except for you and your word and your message to your people. Bless us, I pray. Give us wisdom, give us strength, and give us freedom to speak. In Jesus' name, amen. Johnathan is a great example of what a good friend should be. Johnathan is a wonderful friend. He's the kind of friend that everyone would love to have. The story of Johnathan and David is an example of two men, and I'll get to this, but I'll give you part of it. Two men that have often been accused of homosexuality because of their love relationship and their love for each other. He and David are proof that you can have true love one for another, you can have devotion one to another, and you can be committed one to another, both men, without any impropriety at all. They have been accused, but as I'll show when we get there, it is all accusation, because let's face it, the world doesn't understand how you can love somebody other than physically. When couples date, it's all about physical. When men are become very good friends, people think it's all about physical. Johnathan and David will give us an example of a friendship that defies imagination unless you're thinking pure spiritual thoughts. Except for one episode, Johnathan was the most loyal and the most dedicated friend that David ever had. And we'll look at that one incident and let you form your own opinion. I want to look first of all at Johnathan as the kind of friend we would all like to have. I'll look at him as not only a friend, but a great warrior. He's not just one-sided, he's multifaceted. And then I'll close by asking the question, what kind of friend are you? If we were to compare you to what I'm going to say about Johnathan, how would you match as far as friendships go? First of all, let's notice Johnathan and David. We find out in various passages, and I've got all of the verses written down. You are more than welcome to turn if you wish, but for the sake of time, I have them written down. In chapter just prior to this, in chapter 14, David had just returned from the victory over Goliath and then over the Philistines. When he returned, well, my page is stuck. When he returned, Johnathan, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up just a little bit. David had, in the passages that we read, David had just defeated Goliath. Chapter 14 comes in later. David had defeated Goliath, gone out, fought against the Philistines, had conquered the Philistines, came back to Jerusalem to celebrate his victory. And when Johnathan saw the bravery of David, saw the blessing of David, the victory of David, Johnathan said, "This is the kind of guy I want to be friends with." And so we read there just a little bit. Johnathan demonstrated his bravery, which we'll get to in a minute, but he saw the bravery of David, and he thought to himself, this is the kind of man I want to align with and be friends with. Somehow, when they met, they clicked. And this is the first time that they actually met. Perhaps Johnathan was there when David said, "I'll go fight Goliath." He may have been in the palace somewhere, but this is the first time they actually met one with each other. And their love was so immediate. They clicked. Have you ever met somebody that as soon as you meet them, you just click and you know you've got a friend there? There are people that you have to really work at, but there are people that you just click. Johnathan and David just clicked without any other thing going on. They met each other, they clicked, they knew they were going to be friends. In verse 3, they made a covenant or a promise to each other. Look in verse 3 there. Back in chapter 18, Johnathan and David made a covenant, or they made a promise to each other. And we'll look at that promise in a minute. But they made a promise to each other because he loved him as his own soul. Now, we talk about the love of a husband and his wife. We talk about the love of a parent and a child. Johnathan fell in love with David and knew immediately, I want to be his friends and I will prove it when put to the test. And so Johnathan gave David all of his medals, and I'm putting it in our language. He gave him his robe, which was a sign of royalty. He said, "David, I want you to have this sign of royalty." Then not only that, he gave David his sword and his bow and even his girdle that he wore around to protect himself. "David, I love you so much that I am willing to give you the most precious things that I have to offer." How many of us, years ago, and I tried not to call names when we live stream, but several years ago, we had a member of the church. Some of you will recognize the description. He worked for Homeland Security, did a lot of very secretive work, and as a result of some of his expeditions, he was given a little pen by none other than the Secretary of State at that time. She personally gave him a pen to wear in commemoration of a job that he had done in part of his position. After God saved him, after he became a member, he worked a lot in the print shop, and so we became very close. One day he came in and he took off his pen, which had Homeland Security and all of that wonderful stuff, and said, "I want to give this to you as a token of my friendship." I thought, he has given up something he can't replace. You're not going to get another pen hand-delivered by the Secretary of State that says Homeland Security. My only regret is that it fell off one day and I've never seen it since. It wasn't that I lost a pen. I lose pens all the time, that you wear. But it really, 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 really bothered me because I lost a pen that was given as a token of his friendship to me. I grieved. I mourned, so to speak. Johnathan gave David all of those things that were his as a result of his position and as a result of his accomplishments. Now, David and Johnathan made a covenant. And I have 4 examples that I'm going to read to you very quickly. In 1 Samuel chapter 20, which is after chapter 18, I wasn't trying to be funny because I almost turned my page backward. So it was talking to me. It's after chapter 18. In verse 14, "Thou shalt not only, while yet I live, show me the kindness of the Lord, that I die not." It was customary, or at least frequent, that when you became king, you would kill off the competition. You would get rid of the previous king's sons so that they didn't try to take the kingdom away from you for their father. So not only while I live, so that you don't kill me, I don't die, don't kill me like is often done, but also thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. Not only don't kill me, don't kill my family. That was part of the covenant that they made with each other. Not when the Lord had cut off the enemies of David, every one from the face of the earth. So Johnathan made a covenant. They made a covenant. In chapter 18, they renewed that covenant in chapter 20. So he made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "Let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies." And Johnathan caused David to swear again because he loved him. For he loved him as he loved his own soul. How many people could say, I preached not long ago on, love your neighbor. And I mentioned that then when you got to love your enemy, that really becomes difficult. But even some of my best friends that I've had, could I honestly say I love them as myself? I love them as my own self. Well, chapter 20, skipping down to verse 30. David has made King Saul mad. And so now Saul's anger, in verse 30, was kindled against Johnathan. Now, to give you the background, Johnathan had stood up for David. King Saul had made, some angry comments, threatened to kill David. And so Johnathan stood up for David against his father, and Saul's anger was kindled against Johnathan. He was already mad at David, trying to kill David. Now Saul turns his anger on his own son because his son stood up for David. Notice what he said. Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to the confusion, or to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? In other words, Saul is accusing Johnathan and David of being homosexuals. You have disgraced your own nakedness. You have disgraced the nakedness of your mother. You have caused confusion, that which is not ordinary, that which is not normal, that which would be confusing, contrary to God's word. Do you have some kind of a physical relationship going on with David? That's the accusation that his own father made, and that's the accusation that a lot of homosexuals tried to take and say, even David was a homosexual. Well, he also had about 70 or 80 wives. So what would that make him? If you like boys and girls, I don't know. It's out of my vocabulary. Bisexual. Thank you, Gary. I'm not going to ask how you knew that. He accused Johnathan of loving David so much that he was committing homosexual acts with him. Johnathan bare that, not pleasantly. He goes on in verse 31, Saul continued, for as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Johnathan, you should be the next king. You're my son. You're the next in line to be king. And as long as David is king, you will never be king. Wherefore now, send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. I don't have time to go into every aspect of this. I was thinking as I was typing notes, it'd be very easy to spend 2 weeks, maybe 3. But look at this. Saul is thinking that Johnathan would think like most people. Johnathan, you're next in line for king. As the next in line for king, you cannot be friends with David. David has been anointed to be the next king. We must kill David if you ever have any hope of being king. You gotta kill David. In other words, look out for yourself. Don't worry about David. Take care of number one. Take care of yourself. But instead of backing down, verse 32, Johnathan answered Saul his father and said unto him, wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? What has David done that is worthy of death? Saul cast a javelin at his own son and tried to kill his own son because his son defended David. So he tried to kill his own son. You know, I have known personally, and I have seen many people that will stand until it comes to their family. I heard the expression as a little kid, and I heard it many times growing up, blood is thicker than water. I didn't know what that meant because, you know, I knew what water was. I knew it's pretty thin. I knew blood would coagulate, but I didn't understand how blood was thicker than water and what that had to do with anything. And then I finally figured it out. People that will stand for right against anything else, but when it comes to their own family, they'll do a 180. Johnathan did not change. He defended David when his father tried to kill him. He still defended David, even if it meant that he had to anger his own father. That, my friend, is friendship. I will stand with you. I will back you. I will be with you, even if my own father turns against me and my own father tries to kill me. I love you as a friend. I love you as a brother. I will stand with you even against my own father, even if it means my father tries to kill me. That's how good of a friend you are to me. I've had a couple of friends, I still have some friends who I could call them up right now and say, I need a huge favor. And without hesitation, without even a second thought, their answer would be, what do you need? No limit. What do you need? So Johnathan was such a good friend. Even when his father threw the javelin at him. Verse 34, so Johnathan arose from the table in fierce anger and did eat no meat the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had done him shame. The shame goes back to the confusion of thine own nakedness and to the confusion of thy father's nakedness. Saul had shamed David by accusing him of an immoral act, and it made Johnathan more determined to stand with David. Chapter 20, verse 42. Johnathan said to David, go in peace, for as much as we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. So again, they renewed, they swore, same principle as making a covenant with each other. 1 Samuel 23. David abode in the wilderness in strongholds and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hands. And David saw that Saul was come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a wood. And Johnathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David into the wood and strengthened his hand in God. Johnathan sees that his best friend is being persecuted. His father is hunting him every day, trying to kill him. And he knew that this would, in most cases, this would discourage David. And so he went to encourage David or strengthen his hand in God. He's such a friend that when he saw David going through a difficult time, going through very possibly a depressing time. I've been reading the book of Psalms this past week, and I think I'm down to 75 or 76. But one of the things that jumped out at me, and I've read them many times, and every time I read them, it jumps out to me that many of David's Psalms that David wrote start out depressed. You know, David was a man after God's own heart. And yet as you read the Psalms, many of David's Psalms, now there was 150 Psalms, David wrote over half of them. And some of the other men that wrote started out depressed. I just read Friday, I think. You know, the man said that I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. And he became depressed when he saw the world being blessed and him not being, him, going through difficult times. And then it said, until I went to the house of God and I saw their end. But many of the Psalms start out depressed. But every one of them, somewhere around the middle, change the story, and instead of focusing on their situation and how depressing it is, they turn it around and began pointing at God and rejoicing in God rather than looking at their circumstances. So Johnathan, being the good friend, goes out and strengthens the hand of David in God. Do you have somebody that's going through a tough time? Somebody maybe that you're friends with, and you know they're going through, David's case, he was being hunted like a wild animal. He was being searched all over the place for Saul to find him. And Johnathan knew he was going through some tough times. And so Johnathan took the initiative. Johnathan went to David, found David, and strengthened his hand in God. What kind of friend are we? Then he said in verse 17, fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, and thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee. And they two made a covenant before the Lord. They renewed this promise that we will be friends. We will watch over each other. We will take care of each other. Well, I said Johnathan was a mighty warrior. I'll sum all of this up. It's chapter 13. Johnathan has gone out, he and his armor bearer, and single-handedly defeated a whole garrison of Philistines. Chapter 14. The Philistines have the Jews in bondage. They have taken away their swords. Now, I don't want to get too far off tangent, but the Philistines knew, listen carefully, the Philistines knew if they could disarm the Jews would not be able to fight, and so they took away all of their swords, they took away their picks, they took away their axes, they took away anything that could be used in a defensive way to fight the Philistines. And the Philistines walked in, and the Jews had no power to resist. Does anybody see the parallel? What is it our current president is trying to do right here in America? See, it's not anything new at all. It's been going on for thousands of years. If you want to conquer somebody, first thing you got to do is take away all means of defense. They took away their swords, their axes. They took away their picks. They took away everything. And though we don't use swords and axes and picks today, we have something far superior. And the government under our current president is doing everything in his power to take away Americans' source of defense, and then he can walk in and we have nothing to fight with. Throw that in, no extra. Next, in verse 6, Johnathan and his armor bearer are down in a ravine, and to get up to the top, there's a band of Philistines up there, about 25 Philistines. But to get up there are two very sharp rocks that they have to crawl up this crevice between two sharp rocks to get up to the top. Johnathan says, let's go fight. And they make an agreement to where they'll know if God is saying, go fight, or not to fight. God gives the signal, go fight. They climb up out of that ravine, and Johnathan and his armor bearer defeat 25 Philistines in about a half acre of ground. Well, that caused quite a stir. The Philistines are outraged. So the Philistines gather their army, and Saul gathers his army. But Saul gives a very stupid order. We're going to fight, and you are not allowed to eat anything. Nothing. You can't eat a morsel of bread all day. Well, I don't know about you folks, but just sitting in a chair, I get hungry. Yeah, I remember yesterday, and boy, I was hungry when it was over. There was a lot more donuts until I decided to eat half a dozen of them. No, I only ate one or two. Work, you get hungry. So these men are fighting, but they cannot eat. But Johnathan was so busy fighting the Philistines, he did not hear his dad's rule. He didn't hear his dad's order. So he's out there fighting. He sees a honeybee hive. He reaches down, pulls some honey, eats some honey, and his eyes were enlightened. He was strengthened, and he continued on to fight. Well, his dad found out, and his dad is about to kill his own son for disobeying an order. Now, y'all, I doubt if anybody remembers it, but many, many years ago, maybe I need to find it and preach it again. Children, obey your parents. Is that obey in everything, or are there exceptions? Wives, obey your husbands. Is that in everything, or are there exceptions? Had a man call me years ago and wanted me to talk to his wife. They were having marital problems. And he told me on the phone, he said, I don't need counseling. All I need is for you to tell her that she has to do anything and everything I tell her to do. And I said, ain't gonna happen, buddy. Some people think their wife is a slave of some kind. I can't repeat that sermon, but Johnathan disobeyed his father's order. One, it was a stupid order. Number two, he didn't hear it. He didn't know about it. And so his father chose between him and the nation, then narrowed it down to him and Johnathan, found out it was Johnathan that had eaten. He ordered Johnathan to be killed. And this is one time, Johnathan was so loved by the people that the people stood up against Saul and said, you are not going to kill Johnathan. And so Johnathan survived. But back to he and David. In chapter 19, King Saul gave a direct order to everybody, his soldiers, his commanders, everybody, if you see David, kill him. Johnathan again stood up for him. Now, I said there was one questionable act. In chapter 23, and I read part of this a minute ago, in verse 17, Johnathan said unto David, fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee. Thou shalt be king over Israel. I shall be next unto thee, and that also my father knoweth. Remember, I just read this. And they two made a covenant before the Lord. David abode in the wood, and Johnathan went to his house. Now, there are various opinions. Some think Johnathan went to his house out of loyalty to his father, out of respect to his father. I think Saul, in my opinion, had already used up all respect. Johnathan had already been almost killed. Johnathan had been accused of being a homosexual. Johnathan had been accused of all kinds of things, and his own father tried to kill him. I don't know that there's a whole lot left there to respect. Johnathan, in that very passage, said, David, you're going to be king, and I'm going to be next to you. And this is the questionable part. And some argue for one side, Some argue for the other side, knowing that his father had tried to kill him, knowing that his father had tried to kill David, knowing that David was going to be king. Johnathan chose to go back home. And like I say, that's questionable. I'll give you that much. But he went home knowing, or choosing rather, to go home than to bond with David and forsake his own father. Right after that, right after Johnathan went home, they went out to fight the Philistines. Saul was killed. Johnathan was killed in battle. I can't help but wonder what would have happened had Johnathan stayed with David in the woods, but stayed with David rather than go home to his father. He was killed, I think, because he went home and chose to fight with his father, even though he knew God was going to kill his father and David was going to be king. If there's anything that we could say negative, it would be that he should have committed and said, you know what? I'm going to stay with David. He's going to be the king. I'm going to be next in command. I'm going to cast my lot in with David. And he would have not been fighting a few days later when he was killed. What kind of friend are you? Are you the kind of friend that people can depend on? Have you ever had a fair weather friend? They like you as long as it's to their advantage. Are you the kind of friend that, you know what? I am with you through thick and thin. I will defend you. I will fight for you. I will stand with you. I will strengthen your hand in God when you're down. I will help pull you up when you're in the valley. I will help shine the light when you're in darkness. I want to be the kind of friend that those who call me friend know that they can depend on me. I've had friends, did you hear what so-and-so did? No, what do they do? Now I've heard. You know what I do? If it's a good friend, I pick up the phone and say, hey, so-and-so just said that you did this. I want to hear it from your mouth. Is it true? A friend doesn't just believe everything. He checks it out. He follows it up. And when I found out that it was not true, the next time I heard something, it's like, no, I talked to him personally, and this is what happened, not what you heard. Are you the kind of friend that people can depend on? That would drop everything if a friend called you and said, I need? What kind of friend are you? I hope we all are friends